Dog stops doctors from taking owner off life support. The reason will make you cry. Michael Turner's mornings had always begun the same way. Sunlight filtering through the half-drawn blinds, the scent of brewing coffee wafting from the kitchen, and the reassuring presence of Zeus, his loyal German shepherd, curled at the foot of the bed. Retirement had brought a quieter rhythm to Michael's life, a stark contrast to the years spent navigating the dangers of city streets as a police officer. Now each day unfolded with simple routines, morning jogs tending to the garden, and evenings watching the sun dip below the horizon, Zeus ever at his side. The bond between them was unspoken yet unbreakable, forged in the crucible of duty and danger, where trust had often been the only lifeline. On that morning, however, a lingering unease disrupted their routine. Zeus seemed restless, his amber eyes flicking constantly between Michael and the front door, ears pricked to sounds only he could hear. "What's got you so worked up, buddy?" Michael chuckled, ruffling the dog's thick fur, but the tension in Zeus's stance refused to ease. If Michael had paused a moment longer to consider it, he might have understood the warning in those eyes, but the day's errands were waiting. It was supposed to be a quick trip. The hardware store, a stop at the local diner for supplies, and then back home. The weather was clear, sunlight glinting off the asphalt as Michael pulled onto the main road, the radio murmuring softly. Back at the house, Zeus prowled from room to room, nails clicking against the hardwood, a low whine building in his throat. The crash, when it came, was sudden and merciless. Later, witnesses would recount how a delivery truck, brakes failing on a steep grade, careened through the intersection at 5th and Maple, slamming broadside into Michael's truck. Metal crumpled with a deafening roar, glass shattered, and in a heartbeat, silence descended, thick and suffocating. Paramedics worked swiftly, extracting Michael's unconscious body from the wreckage, the harsh glare of emergency lights painting the scene in garish flashes. They spoke in clipped tones, voices tight with urgency, but it was the look that passed between them, the barely concealed grimness that lingered longest in the minds of onlookers. At the hospital, machines hummed and beeped in sterile synchronization, a cruel parody of life. Michael lay motionless, the stark white of his bandages contrasting sharply with the bruises blooming dark and angry across his skin. His family gathered, faces pale and drawn, eyes rimmed red. The doctor's words were clinical, delivered with the kind of detached compassion honed over years of giving bad news. Severe brain trauma, coma, limited chances of recovery. The words hung heavily, a weight none of them could lift. But in the hallway, a different kind of grief played out. Zeus, who had slipped from the house and trailed the ambulance, now stood in the hospital corridor, nails skittering on linoleum, chest heaving with each breath. Nurses hesitated, startled by the sudden presence of a large dog, but the sight of those desperate eyes, the way Zeus pressed forward as if pulled by an unseen tether, halted their protests. One of the paramedics, recognizing the dog from the scene, spoke softly to the staff, and the protest died away, replaced by a hushed, respectful silence. They allowed him into Michael's room. Just for a moment, they insisted, but Zeus refused to leave. Settling by the hospital bed, he pressed his nose to Michael's hand, a whine building in his throat, eyes flickering between Michael's still face and the monitors that marked time in cold mechanical beats. Hours passed, then a full day, but Zeus remained, vigilant and unmoving. Nurses, touched by the display of loyalty, brought blankets and bowls of water, whispering soft assurances that did little to soothe the aching silence. Michael's family watched with a mix of heartbreak and helplessness as the dog refused food, refused even to leave the bedside long enough to rest. Each time someone approached to coax him away, Zeus growled softly, not a threat, but a plea. His eyes, dark and wide, held a single message, not without him. Days stretched into weeks. The doctor spoke more frequently of letting go, of peace and acceptance, but each time the words met resistance. Michael's mother, her hands clasped and knuckles white, shook her head. His sister wept openly, one hand covering her mouth. Through it all, Zeus remained a constant, head resting on the thin hospital blanket, ears flicking at each sound from the machines. On the morning of the 10th day, a decision was made. The family gathered, voices hushed, each syllable heavy with finality. The hospital chaplain spoke softly, his words a blur through the fog of grief. A nurse moved to adjust the IV line, her eyes glistening, when a sudden growl cut through the quiet. Zeus, usually stoic, rose abruptly, body tense, hackles bristling, his teeth bared in a warning not directed at any threat, but at the action itself, the finality of it. The nurse froze, glancing back uncertainly. Michael's mother inhaled sharply, eyes wide with something that was neither fear nor hope, but a painful mix of both. A doctor moved forward, hands raised, but Zeus blocked the way, head low, growl deepening to a rumble that vibrated through the air, and then amidst the chaos, a finger twitched. Michael's finger, barely noticeable, a flutter beneath the sheets. The machines picked it up first, a faint blip of activity on an EEG monitor, then another. The growling ceased abruptly. Zeus stepped back, ears perked, eyes fixed intently on Michael's face, and let out a soft, questioning whine. Nurses rushed forward, disbelief giving way to frantic activity, monitors lighting up with a sudden spike of electrical pulses. Michael's mother clutched the bedrail, eyes glistening. Hours passed in a blur of medical jargon and cautious optimism. No one noticed Zeus as he eased back to his spot by the bed, head resting lightly against Michael's side, eyes half closed but watchful. The tension in his body ebbed slightly, replaced by a quiet vigilance. Outside the room, doctors conferred in hushed tones, their expressions caught between disbelief and cautious hope. But inside, in the stillness broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft rise and fall of Michael's breathing, Zeus lay motionless, eyes never leaving his owner's face, waiting for the next sign, the next breath, the next heartbeat. A soldier at his post, refusing to surrender. Days bled into each other in the sterile quiet of the hospital, a place where time seemed suspended between the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft-soled steps of nurses making their rounds. Zeus remained a constant by Michael's side, a silent guardian whose presence both unsettled and inspired the medical staff. The hospital administrators had raised objections at first, policies about animals, hygiene concerns, liability, until one of the senior doctors, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, overruled them. "If he wants to stay, let him," she'd said simply, her gaze softening at the sight of Zeus curled protectively by the bed. There was something in the way the dog never flinched, never wandered, his focus so absolute that it seemed almost human. News of Zeus's vigil spread quickly, whispers weaving through the hospital's halls, drawing nurses and even patients to Michael's door. They peered in with a mix of awe and sadness at the sight of the massive German shepherd, eyes fixed unwaveringly on Michael's face, as if willing him back to life by sheer force of loyalty. Some snapped photos, sharing the story online, where it ignited hearts beyond the hospital walls. A tale of a dog who refused to abandon his owner, even as hope dwindled. Meanwhile, Zeus's behavior grew stranger still. Nurses began noticing the way he responded to shifts in Michael's vitals before the monitors even blipped. He would stiffen, ears pricking forward, moments before a drop in blood pressure set alarms wailing. Once, when Michael's heart rate faltered dangerously, Zeus sprang up with a bark so sharp it drew staff rushing in, finding Michael's monitors lighting up in frantic alerts. They exchanged glances, half disbelief, half reverence, as if questioning if the dog truly understood the stakes. The neurologist, Dr. Patel, initially dismissed it as coincidence, but after observing the pattern too many times, he found himself lingering by the door, arms folded, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. During one late-night round, he murmured to a colleague, "I've seen therapy dogs do wonders, but this is something else." Zeus's refusal to leave even for brief moments to eat or relieve himself led one of the nurses, a young woman named Elena, with a soft spot for animals, to start sneaking in bits of roast chicken from her own lunch. She'd approach cautiously, palm outstretched, murmuring softly until Zeus would at last relent, taking the morsel with a careful precision that belied his size. But he ate sparingly, gaze flicking back to Michael after each bite, as if afraid something might change in his absence. The days stretched into weeks. Michael's family came and went in exhausted shifts, eyes rimmed with shadows, voices dull with the weight of uncertainty. His mother, frail and stooped, spent long hours in a chair by the window, rosary beads slipping rhythmically through her fingers. His sister Anna moved briskly between home and hospital, her expression tightly drawn to mask the cracks beneath. But it was Zeus they spoke of most often, their words hushed with a kind of reverence. "It's like he knows," Anna murmured one evening, gaze fixed on the dog whose head lay lightly on Michael's leg, ears twitching at every breath, every sigh. "Like he's waiting for something." But as the neurologist's reports continued to show minimal improvement, discussions began to circle back to the unspoken question hanging between every sigh, every rustle of paper. How long could they hold on before acceptance became the only kindness left? The turning point came on a storm-soaked Thursday, the kind of day where rain pounded relentlessly against the windows, casting shadows that flickered like ghosts across the walls. Zeus had barely moved all morning, eyes half closed but ears swiveling at each unfamiliar sound. The nurses moved about with a subdued efficiency, speaking in low tones that matched the gloom outside. Around noon, Dr. Patel entered with Anna and Michael's mother, faces pale but resolved. The neurologist's voice was gentle yet firm, the words well rehearsed from countless such conversations before. "There's been no significant change," he said, glancing at the clipboard, as if to avoid meeting their eyes directly. "We need to consider next steps and what Michael would have wanted." The words hung, heavy and final, and Anna's breath caught audibly, a small, strangled sound that made her mother's grip on the rosary tighten until her knuckles blanched. As if sensing the shift, Zeus lifted his head, eyes narrowing, a low rumble starting deep in his chest. The neurologist paused mid-sentence, glancing down with a mixture of annoyance and sympathy. But before anyone could react, Zeus moved, pressing his body fully against Michael's side, a growl rumbling louder now, not menacing, but pleading, a sound that made the room hold its breath. Anna took a step forward, hand half raised. "Zeus, it's okay," she whispered, voice cracking, but the dog's gaze never wavered from Michael's face. In that charged moment, a monitor blipped, a small, almost imperceptible jump in heart rate that made the nurse closest to it pause, eyes widening. Dr. Patel frowned, glancing between the screen and Michael, disbelief flickering briefly across his features. Then, as if in answer, Michael's fingers twitched, the barest flutter against the sheets, but enough to send Anna stumbling back with a gasp. The room erupted into motion, doctors shouting for tests, nurses flooding in with wide eyes and disbelieving smiles. Zeus's growl subsided into a whine, the sound raw and quivering with hope. He pressed closer, nose brushing Michael's wrist, eyes gleaming wetly. Amidst the chaos of stethoscopes and beeping monitors, Anna gripped her mother's arm, eyes brimming with tears. "He moved," she choked, voice breaking on each syllable. "Mom, he moved." And for the first time in weeks, Michael's mother let out a sob that was not of grief, but of something dangerously close to hope. Through the hours that followed, as tests were run and disbelief warred with cautious optimism, Zeus refused to be moved, his eyes locked onto Michael's face with a focus that bordered on desperation. Even as orderlies tried to guide him back, he held his ground, ears flat, eyes imploring. At last, one of the doctors sighed, gesturing them off with a weary but softened gaze. "Let him stay," she murmured. "Maybe he knows something we don't." In the days that followed, Michael's responses, though faint and sporadic, continued. A flicker of fingers, a twitch of eyelids, each small movement greeted by Zeus with a soft whine or the thump of his tail against the linoleum. The hospital staff, despite themselves, found reasons to linger near the room, to watch the dog whose devotion seemed to bend even fate. Nurses whispered of miracles in the break room, doctors cleared their throats when questioned, but all found their eyes drawn again and again to the sight of Zeus, head bowed beside the bed, waiting with a patience that spoke of an understanding beyond words. And in the quiet hours of night, when shadows stretched long and the world hushed to the soft beeping of monitors, Zeus would press his head gently to Michael's side, eyes half-lidded but watchful, holding vigil still. The first light of dawn filtered weakly through the rain-streaked hospital window, painting the room in hues of pale gray and gold. Michael's breaths came slow and steady, a rhythm mirrored in the soft rise and fall of Zeus's chest, where the dog lay pressed against the hospital bed. Nurses moved quietly, checking vitals and adjusting monitors with a kind of reverent silence, as if fearful that even the smallest noise might shatter the fragile thread of hope that had taken root. Zeus's eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, never left Michael's face, his ears twitching at each murmur of voices beyond the door, every mechanical beep that punctuated the silence. The exhaustion in his posture was evident, but his resolve was unbroken. The story of the dog who wouldn't leave his owner's side had spread far beyond the hospital walls now, carried by social media posts and local news segments that painted Zeus as a symbol of loyalty and love. Flowers and letters began arriving, some addressed to Michael, others to Zeus himself. Words of encouragement and prayers for miracles. Nurses would pause to read them aloud during their rounds, their voices hushed but warm, and Zeus would listen, head tilted slightly, as if understanding every word. Michael's mother, eyes red-rimmed but bright with a new spark of hope, took to sitting by the window each day, knitting blankets in soft blues and grays. The repetitive motion soothed her, though her gaze lingered often on Zeus, her lips moving in whispered prayers of thanks. Anna visited daily now, fingers brushing lightly over Michael's hand as she spoke of memories. The fishing trips they'd taken as kids, the way he'd taught her to ride a bike without training wheels, how he never failed to show up at her door with soup whenever she fell ill. Her words were a lifeline, a tether to a past unmarred by sterile white walls and the scent of antiseptic. And each time Michael's eyelids fluttered or a finger twitched, Anna's voice would falter, tears welling unbidden. But it was Zeus who seemed to feel it most, the subtle changes, the signs that Michael was fighting his way back from the abyss. When Michael's fingers moved slightly one evening, clenching weakly around the thin hospital blanket, Zeus's ears shot forward, a low whine slipping free before he could stop it. The nurse on duty, a young man with sandy hair and a kind smile, leaned forward with wide eyes. "Did you see that?" he breathed, hand flying to press the call button for the attending physician. In the hours that followed, the room buzzed with energy, doctors calling for tests, voices rising in cautious excitement. Through it all, Zeus remained rooted, eyes bright and intent. Dr. Patel, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights, hovered over Michael's bed, murmuring instructions and flicking his pen nervously. His initial skepticism about Zeus's role had given way to something far less certain, an uneasy acknowledgement that perhaps science did not have all the answers. He glanced once at the dog, at the way Zeus's gaze never faltered, and shook his head with a soft sigh. "I've seen patients respond to family," he admitted to a colleague one evening, voice low. "But a dog? I don't even know how to begin explaining it." Word of Michael's progress spread quickly, drawing not only local reporters, but journalists from larger networks, all eager to capture the story of the dog who defied the odds. Anna fielded the questions with quiet dignity, her voice trembling only when she spoke of the accident, of those first awful days when all hope seemed gone. Cameras flashed and questions flew, about Michael, about Zeus, about faith and miracles, and whether love alone could bridge the gap between life and death. But when asked if she believed Zeus was responsible for Michael's progress, Anna's response was simple and sure. "Of course," she said, fingers brushing lightly over Zeus's ears. "He never gave up, not for a second." Days passed and Michael's responses grew more pronounced. A hand squeezing faintly, eyelids flickering, small but unmistakable signs that drew soft gasps from nurses and weary smiles from Anna and her mother. But the most remarkable change came one rainy afternoon when Michael's eyes opened fully, unfocused at first, lids heavy and sluggish, but open. The room fell deathly quiet, even the steady beeping of monitors seeming to hush in reverence. Anna's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide and brimming with tears. "Michael," she whispered, voice barely audible. Michael's gaze slid slowly, clumsily, until it landed not on the machines or Anna, but on Zeus, the German shepherd who had been lying motionless, sprang up with a soft bark, eyes alight with something between disbelief and pure, unfiltered joy. The noise startled Michael, pulling a faint, puzzled frown to his brow. His lips moved, cracked and dry, but the word was unmistakable. "Zeus?" The whisper, hoarse and barely there, sent Anna stumbling back with a sob, her hands clapping over her mouth. Zeus whined low, pressing forward to nudge Michael's hand with a wet nose, tail a blur of motion. Michael's fingers twitched sluggishly, but they curled instinctively into the thick fur, weak but certain. A nurse rushed out to summon Dr. Patel, whose eyes widened visibly at the sight of Michael, pale but conscious, hand resting in the ruff of his dog's neck. Over the days that followed, the news of Michael's awakening spread like wildfire, igniting hope that reached far beyond the hospital walls. Reporters camped in the parking lot, cameras ready, their breath misting in the chill morning air. Donations flooded in to cover medical expenses, sent by strangers who had followed the story from afar, moved by the unshakable bond between a man and his dog. Hospital staff, hardened by years of losses and sterile corridors, found themselves lingering by Michael's door on breaks, sharing disbelieving smiles and murmured prayers of thanks. But amidst the chaos and celebration, it was Zeus who never left, eyes trained on Michael's every move, ears flicking at each shallow breath. Even as Michael struggled through the fog of consciousness, disoriented, words slurring together in ways that made Anna bite her lip to hold back tears, Zeus was there, a warm, unyielding presence that seemed to anchor him to reality. One evening, as rain drummed steadily against the window and the world outside blurred in shades of gray, Michael managed to lift a trembling hand, fingers carding weakly through Zeus's fur. His voice, cracked and thin, rasped out in a whisper. "You stayed," he murmured, eyes glassy with pain, and something softer, something grateful and raw. Zeus responded by pressing closer, a soft huff leaving his snout, eyes half-lidded but watchful. Anna, sitting nearby with fingers clenched in the fabric of her sweater, exhaled shakily, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Of course he did," she whispered, voice breaking with the weight of it. "He never left, not for a second." And in the dim light of that quiet room, amidst monitors and IV drips and rain-soaked windows, Michael's eyes fluttered shut once more, lips curving faintly. But his hand remained buried in Zeus's fur, grip weak but certain, a promise unspoken but understood, of faith and loyalty, of a bond that neither time nor tragedy could sever. The days that followed were a blur of cautious smiles, medical jargon, and the sterile scent of antiseptic that clung stubbornly to the air. Michael's progress, though slow, was undeniable. His eyes, once dull and unfocused, now followed voices with a hazy attentiveness, the glassy emptiness receding by fractions with each passing day. Words came sparingly, cracked and slurred, as if drawn from a well that hadn't been touched in months. But they came, coaxed patiently by Anna's soft encouragements and Zeus's warm, unwavering presence. Nurses rotated in shifts, their steps lighter and smiles brighter, as if Michael's recovery was a victory for them all. Dr. Patel made his rounds with a skeptical frown that softened by degrees each time he glanced at the monitors, the jagged lines and steady beeps, a symphony of resilience that no medical textbook could quite explain. He'd pause sometimes, eyes lingering on Zeus, who lay coiled beside the bed, head resting lightly on Michael's leg, eyes half-lidded but vigilant. There were no more talks of life support, no more sympathetic nods or rehearsed condolences, just a quiet, collective hope that filled every corner of the room like sunlight after a storm. Zeus seemed to sense the shift, his eyes brighter, his ears flicking at every rasped syllable that fell from Michael's lips. He still refused to leave the bedside for more than a few minutes at a time, nosing at Michael's hand until the fingers, clumsy but determined, carded through his thick fur with an affection that left Anna biting her lip to stifle tears. Even the doctors, hardened by years of loss and bitter farewells, found themselves lingering longer, murmuring questions about Michael's comfort, adjusting blankets with uncharacteristic gentleness, The story of the German shepherd who defied death for his owner had spread far and wide, drawing news crews and reporters who huddled outside the hospital doors, breath misting in the crisp autumn air. Headlines painted Zeus as a hero, a beacon of loyalty that transcended words, and donations poured in from across the country, cards and letters scrawled with messages of hope and faith. Small gifts left at the hospital desk, some addressed directly to Zeus with shaky handwriting and paw print stickers. Nurses would carry them into the room, smiling softly as they read snippets aloud, their voices lifting and falling like lullabies. And Zeus would perk up, head tilting, as if listening with the focus of a soldier receiving orders. One morning, as sunlight poured in through the blinds in lazy streaks of gold, Michael stirred, eyes fluttering open to find Anna dozing in the chair beside him, head tilted at an awkward angle. Zeus lay pressed against the bed, eyes dark and wide, ears pricking forward as Michael's fingers shifted weakly in his fur. Michael swallowed, throat dry and raw, eyes skimming the IV lines and monitors, the slow realization settling like a weight on his chest. He drew a breath, thin and shaky, and managed to rasp a single word, hoarse but clear. Home. The whisper was so faint that Anna didn't stir, but Zeus did, ears twitching, eyes sharpening with a mix of relief and something deeper, something that left him pressing closer, a soft whine escaping unbidden. When Anna finally blinked awake, rubbing her eyes with a small, confused frown, she found Michael's gaze steady and bright. Lips curved faintly, the hint of a smile tugging at the corners. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes shimmering with disbelief and joy, and she all but stumbled forward, fingers curling around Michael's hand with a grip that trembled violently. "Oh God," she choked, voice breaking. "Michael, you're really—" But the rest dissolved into soft, shuddering sobs, forehead dropping to his shoulder as relief surged like a tidal wave. It took another week before the doctors finally relented, reluctantly agreeing to discharge Michael under the condition of regular checkups and in-home care. Anna busied herself signing forms with a hand that trembled only slightly, eyes flicking to Zeus every few moments, with a gratitude so fierce it left her throat tight. When the day finally came, and Michael was wheeled through the automatic doors, autumn leaves swirling in gusts of red and gold, Zeus walked at his side, tail held high, ears flicking at every rustle and voice. Reporters clustered at the entrance, cameras flashing, questions spilling over one another in a jumbled rush. How did it feel to be home? What was next? Did he believe his recovery was a miracle? Michael, eyes tired but warm, managed a faint smile, fingers brushing through Zeus's fur in a gesture that spoke louder than any words could. "I guess I just had a good reason to come back," he rasped, voice still rough around the edges but steady. Anna's laugh broke free, wet and incredulous, and even the reporters seemed momentarily speechless, microphones lowering as they watched Zeus lean into Michael's side, eyes half-lidded and content. The drive home was quiet, autumn sunlight flickering through branches and casting dappled shadows over the road. Anna drove, eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, lips pressed tight as if fearful that the spell might break. Michael leaned back against the seat, eyes half closed, fingers absently carding through Zeus's fur, where the dog lay sprawled across the back seat, head in Michael's lap, eyes fluttering with exhaustion. The house, when they finally pulled up the gravel drive, looked almost foreign after so long. The porch dusted with leaves, windows dark and shuttered. But the sight of it, familiar and warm, left Michael's eyes stinging, a lump rising unbidden in his throat. Anna helped him inside, hands gentle but firm, voice trembling slightly as she prattled about how she'd tried to keep things tidy, how the neighbors had mowed the lawn and kept an eye out, how there was chicken soup on the stove if he was hungry. Her voice broke only once, when Michael glanced down at Zeus, who trotted in with ears pricked and tail wagging furiously, eyes darting from the kitchen to the living room and back, as if ensuring everything was still where it ought to be. "He never stopped waiting," Anna whispered, voice thick with tears. "Every day he'd sit at the door, just waiting." The days that followed were slow and quiet, the kind of peace Michael hadn't realized he'd craved until he was surrounded by it. The creak of floorboards under socked feet, The faint hum of the heater, Zeus's soft snores from the rug by the fire. Recovery was slow and grueling. Each step he battle fought inch by inch. Exercises that left his muscles burning, words that slipped and tangled clumsily on his tongue. But Zeus was always there, nudging his hand when the frustration swelled hot and bitter, pressing close with a low whine until Michael's fingers found fur and his breathing evened once more. Some nights when pain made sleep elusive and shadows stretched long across the walls, Michael would find himself murmuring brokenly into Zeus's fur, words of thanks and guilt and love, the kind of confessions one only makes in the dark. And Zeus, eyes dark and understanding, would lean into the touch, breaths warm and steady, the unspoken promise as clear as any vow. "You stayed," Michael rasped once, voice cracking with the weight of it, and Zeus's response was a slow blink, a soft huff, and the press of a warm head against his chest. A simple answer that spoke of a love that neither time nor death nor darkness could sever. Winter settled slowly over the town, draping trees and rooftops in frosted white, turning every breath into soft clouds that lingered in the air. Michael's recovery, though slow and grueling, continued with the steady determination that had seen him through years of service and every battle since. Mornings began with sunlight filtering through the kitchen window, the scent of coffee and pine lingering faintly, and Zeus sprawled contentedly at Michael's feet, ears flicking at every small sound. The therapy sessions were exhausting, hours of stretching and speech exercises that left his muscles trembling and words slipping clumsily over his tongue. But Michael pushed through each one with teeth clenched and eyes fixed on the goal. Zeus was there for every step, eyes dark and intent, a shadow that never faltered. Even the therapist, a woman with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense tone, couldn't quite hide her smile at the sight of the massive German shepherd who followed every command with military precision. "He's more disciplined than half the patients I've had," she quipped once, watching Zeus nudge a water bottle closer when Michael's fingers trembled. Michael had chuckled hoarsely, the sound thin and cracked but genuine, fingers curling into thick fur in silent thanks. Outside, news of Michael's recovery spread with the inevitability of wildfire. Reporters sent emails daily, headlines painted the story in bold letters. Miracle recovery, officer saved by loyal dog, the bond that defied death, hero dog's vigil brings coma, patient back. And cards arrived by the dozens, scrawled with shaky handwriting and well wishes. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and warm smiles, eyes darting to Zeus with awe and gratitude that left Michael's throat tight. Anna fielded most of the interviews, her voice steady but soft, eyes bright with pride and something deeper. She spoke of Zeus's vigil, of the way the dog had refused to leave, how every growl and whine had been a plea to hold on just a little longer. Cameras captured the words, broadcast them to living rooms and phones across the country, but what they couldn't capture was the way Michael's hand found Zeus's rough each time, fingers curling tightly as if to ground himself to the moment, to the warmth and weight of the dog who had brought him back from the edge. The first time Michael ventured outside alone, the sun hung low and pale, frost clinging to grass and brittle silver shards that crunched beneath boots. His steps were slow, uneven, the cane an unfamiliar weight in one hand. But Zeus stayed close, shoulder brushing his knee, eyes flicking between Michael's face and the path ahead. They made it as far as the garden, dormant now, rows of wilted stems poking through snow. And Michael stopped, breath misting in short puffs, pain thrumming through stiff muscles. Zeus nosed at his hand, a soft whine slipping free, and Michael chuckled hoarsely, a sound that cracked and faltered, but held a warmth that melted the chill from the air. "Yeah, I know, buddy," he rasped, fingers curling in fur, voice rough but fond. "Not quite up to the old routine, huh?" Zeus responded with a soft huff, pressing closer, and they stayed like that for a while. Man and dog, the silence between them comfortable and whole. It was Anna's idea, half joking at first, when she suggested training service dogs for veterans. "You've got the time," she teased, eyes flicking to Zeus, who lay sprawled on the rug, one ear flicked attentively. And you've already got the world's most loyal assistant. Michael had snorted, the sound rusty but amused. But the idea planted a seed that took root quietly, steadily. Days passed, snow piling high against window panes, firelight flickering warm and steady. Michael spent hours researching, printing forms with fingers that trembled slightly less each day, making calls in a voice still hoarse but growing stronger. By January, the first veterans began arriving, some missing limbs, some with eyes dark and haunted, all of them pausing at the door with hesitant smiles that faded into something softer at the sight of Zeus, tail wagging furiously, eyes bright and welcoming. The program was small at first, just a few veterans and their assigned dogs, but word spread quickly, and soon the house was filled with soft barks and the scuffle of paws, with laughter that came more easily with each day. Michael moved among them slowly, leaning on his cane, voice quiet but sure, Zeus a warm shadow at his side. They watched him with eyes that understood, that recognized the pain and the struggle, and the sheer stubborn refusal to give in. One afternoon, a young man with a prosthetic leg and tattoos winding up his arms paused as Michael adjusted a harness on a golden retriever, eyes flicking to Zeus with a crooked smile. "They say you came back because of him," he said, tone half disbelieving, half reverent. "Is it true?" Michael glanced down, fingers stilling in thick fur, eyes softening. Zeus gazed back, tail thumping lightly against the floor, and Michael's lips curved faintly, the ache in his chest easing. "Yeah," he rasped, voice quiet but sure. "Yeah, it's true." The young man huffed a laugh, eyes glinting wetly, and nodded, fingers brushing over the golden's ears with a tenderness that spoke of wounds still healing. Months passed, winter melting into spring, the world greening slowly beneath sunlight that lingered a little longer each day. The program grew, veterans coming and going with smiles that reached their eyes, dogs trotting proudly at their sides, tails high and ears pricked. Zeus, older now, flecks of gray dusting his muzzle, watched each one with a steady gaze, a quiet approval that left Michael's throat tight with gratitude. On a warm evening in June, with fireflies flickering in the dusky light and the air heavy with honeysuckle, Michael found himself sitting on the porch, cane propped against the rail, a glass of lemonade sweating on the step beside him. Zeus lay at his feet, eyes half-lidded, breath slow and deep, ears flicking at each rustle of wind. Michael's fingers carted absently through thick fur, eyes tracing the horizon where the sky bled into shades of orange and lavender. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, peace settled soft and sure, filling the cracks left by months of pain and silence. Michael exhaled slowly, eyes falling shut, head tilting back against the porch rail. His voice, when it came, was quiet and raw, the words slipping free unbidden. "I don't know what I'd have done without you," he murmured, fingers curling tightly, voice cracking on the last syllable. Zeus stirred, eyes glinting softly in the twilight, and shifted until his head rested against Michael's knee. A warm weight that left Michael's chest tight and aching. The answer was simple. No words, just the steady press of warmth and the soft huff of breath that spoke of a love that neither darkness nor death could sever. Michael's eyes stung, a tear slipping free to trace a path down weathered skin, and he laughed shakily, the sound hoarse but whole. "Yeah," he whispered, voice breaking but sure, fingers trembling but steady. "I know, buddy. I know." And as night settled slow and quiet over the town, wrapping the world in shadow and stars, man and dog stayed as they were, leaning into the warmth of each other, whole and unbroken at last.